Going.
Sure.
All righty. We're so back, ladies and gentlemen, with another exciting episode of The Chase, the show that dives deep into the world of high performance alongside some of the world's most esteemed leaders, athletes, and ambitious individuals who are making their mark on the world. I'm your host, Christian Dyer, and today I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, none other than Latt Mansor, who holds a PhD in physiology, anatomy, genetics, attended the University of Oxford, and is currently the research lead at a company called H.V.M.N, which are definitely making their mark in the world of health, longevity, performance, and overall vitality. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Christian.
It's a pleasure. And what did I leave out of your resume? I'm sure there was one or two things. So if you could fill everybody else in.
Yeah, I mean, we can always talk about it. I come from a humble little town called Ipoh, in Malaysia. Uh, Ironically, same town that Michelle Yeoh comes from. And I was born and bred, in Malaysia. Grew up until I was 20. Went to the UK, did my undergraduate in biotechnology in University of Nottingham. And then I left, went to the US for the first time, did my master's in biotechnology as well from Columbia University in New York. And then thereafter, I told myself, well, I don't think research is for me. It's too boring. It's facing test tubes every day. I prefer human interaction. I want to translate science into everyday application. And during that time as well, I understood more about physiology and metabolism, knowing that I can change my own body composition, my own lifestyle to get a healthier outcome. Because before that, I always thought I'm going to end up being obese, having diabetes, and having cardiovascular disease, because that's what my family sort of have high prevalence of. We have high prevalence of diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease. My late father died of stroke. Before that, he had a heart attack. So for me growing up, I thought like, well, that is predestined and everything is set because it's genetics. And that is during that time after my master's, I was like, you know what, I managed to lose all this weight. I feel healthier. I felt that I could move faster, and it felt good, right? And that was when I said to myself, I've learned all of this not only for myself. Now, how can I apply that knowledge that I've learned into a job that allows me to translate all of this into practical advice or practical tips? And that was when I ironically joined a pharmaceutical company. I joined a pharmaceutical company called the Medicines Company. They specialize in critical care pathway, so in PCI, like percutaneous coronary intervention, like stents for heart attack patients. They sell a drug for those operations, so those surgeries. And then after a year and a half working for that company, I got inspired to actually apply for my PhD, because I thought PhD is just for research. If you are passionate to be a researcher and want to spend your time in the lab and discovering all the cool cutting edge science and win the Nobel Prize, then go do a PhD. But then during that time I was in the pharmaceutical company, that was when I realized that was not necessarily the case, because there's so many PhDs who are not in the lab. They are still experts in their own respective fields, and they're contributing to the society in the same way. So that was when I decided, you know what, I love my job. I don't mind I don't mind staying in this position, because I was working from Munich office at that point. But at the same time, I decided to apply to Oxford and Cambridge, and I told myself, well, if I got in, it'll be, I'll be lucky, and those are great universities to go on to, and a PhD program in the UK takes 3 years as opposed to like 5-6 years in the US. So 3 more years, I'll still be below 30, and I'll get my PhD. So why not? And I got accepted in 2010. So my entry was fall 2011. And then I did my PhD for 3 years, went back to Southeast Asia, worked in a diabetes management program startup in Singapore for a year and a half, came out, ran my own company around health tech for a year and a half. And then in 2019, I joined H.V.M.N as the research lead. And right now, with my research lead hat on, I am leading our $6 million contract with the Special Command, US Department of Defense, as well as any collaborations we have with clinicians, institutions, all the researchers around the world that are looking at using ketone IQ or exogenous ketones in either performance or therapeutic areas.
Wow, that's incredible. Appreciate the insight, because one of my questions is I wanted to dig into a little bit of the why behind your whole background and what you're doing. But it sounds to me like there were so many intrinsic motivating factors, from potentially, a preventative standpoint of, I have this lineage and I may be predestined to go down, these routes. Let's figure out why, and let's figure out how I can't. If
Yeah.
that if there's any accuracy, to that statement at all.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely. I think it, as noble as it is for us to say, oh, I want to do this to help people, I want to do this to save lives. Yes, but it almost always starts with a selfish reason, because will always think about ourselves first, especially when it comes to comfort, when it comes to health, when it comes to quality of our lives. We would think, what can I do? What can I learn
Mm,
to improve our conditions first? And then with that knowledge, okay, now I feel that other people don't have to go through the struggle that I've gone through if I manage to have a platform to spread this knowledge and information. So it started with me thinking about myself. It's like, oh my God, like I'm going to be fat all my life. I'm going to be like, that guy who's running for the bus and panting and still not make it. And that's what I'm going to end up with. But ultimately, knowing that there is hope and that there are things that I can do, many things that I can do, that gave me the light to really push forward. And then I realized, you know what, like I've put so much time and effort to do this. What if there are other kids out there who are overweight and
mm.
thinking the same, but they may or may not have the same facilities or same amenities to learn this knowledge? I mean, I'm sure they are able to Google and all that, but I think recently I saw a reel. They were saying that yes, we are living in this abundance world of abundance of information, but the problem is when you search it, like the health information usually comes like page, 5, 6, 7, and people stop at page 2 on Google search. And you also need to know what to search for as well,
Yeah.
because we have such abundance of information that you can pretty much search for anything, even if they're exactly contradictory to each other. For example, if you say fat is good, and you search fat is good, you will find evidence that fats are good. And if you search fat is bad, you will also be able to find evidence that fat is bad. So it really depends on, one, what you search and how you search it, and two, how are you able to disseminate the quality of the resources that you find.
That's so spot on. It's funny because there's a quote: "You're most powerfully positioned to serve the person you once were." It aligns with your story. It aligns with my story, the origins of the chase and everything I'm doing. And it's refreshing to hear you have the same perspective, and same thought process. But before we get into some of the meat of all this, I'm going to take a shot. I hope we
I'm
can
going to take a
cheers
shot.
through. All right, we're going to cheers through the camera. We're going to, for everybody listening, we're going to get into what we're doing in a little bit after we get into a little bit of the metabolic flexibility and some of that. But chin chin, cheers to you. Thanks for
Cheers.
being here.
Thank you for having me.
How would you describe the taste?
People used to describe our first generation of exogenous ketones, which was ketone ester. They described it as battery acid, rocket
Mm,
fuel.
mm,
Doesn't taste good, basically. This
yeah.
one, I wouldn't describe it as bad. but it certainly is no soda water, or like, it's not soda, soft drinks or whatever. um
Why
it's
why is the shot version, which I have right now, taste different than the big bottle version?
because the shot version is more diluted, so
Okay.
that's 10 grams in 59 milliliters. The big bottle, you're getting 10 grams in 35 milliliters.
Oh,
So
okay.
you're almost doubling the volume, but having the same amount of active ingredient. So
Yep.
it is more diluted. And because I believe the shots do not have preservatives, because it's only, single serves, whereas this one, multi serve, you need to have preservatives so that people can keep it longer. There is also less citric acid for the
Mm.
flavoring. So it's a little bit milder in the shots.
Huh. Oh, interesting. All right, you use the term metabolic flexibility quite often. And the best way I can sum it up for those who have no idea what the heck I'm talking about is basically our body's ability to switch between, I guess, using fat or glucose, meaning carbohydrates, as fuel. Please go a bit deeper into this and also explain to the listeners why it's so important for us to have, greater metabolic flexibility in our lives.
So metabolic flexibility, I would add on to what you just described, which is, quite accurate, is the ability to switch between substrates. So not necessarily just glucose and fats, but we're looking at even ketones, even proteins. When do we even use proteins?
Mm.
Preferably not, because the body will always prioritize to hold on to the proteins because of how important proteins are with our bodily function, especially with, the formations of different enzymes and hormones are usually from proteins. So the body will always prioritize to save proteins to be the last before they break it down. So glucose will always be the first to be broken down because of how easily available they are in order to provide us with energy. But in terms of storage, calorie dense storage would always go to fats. So fats store way more calories in the body, and our bodies are also designed to have that capacity as well, having, adipose tissue being a very large tissue, which is the layer underneath, the skin, which we store fat. And whenever we need energy that glucose can't provide fully to, then we'll start mobilizing the fatty acids stored in these adipose tissues.
Hmm.
Why do we need metabolic flexibility? Now, that comes to the idea of the function of the body, because we as humans, and we as organisms, we do many things, we perform many different types of activities, and we are being put in very different types of situations where we need to respond accordingly. For example, if we go back to ancestral sort of idea of and, early humans, where we are hunting, we are going through starvation because there are no storages for food, and therefore we need to go hunt, finish the food, and then realize we don't have enough food, and then go out and hunt again. So that period of time requires us to behave differently, or require our body functions to respond differently. Because obviously, when you're hunting, you need that focus, you need to have that athleticism, you need to have that physical performance in order to make sure that you get the your prey. But during starvation, during when you're sleeping, you need to preserve energy. Same thing with modern human beings. When you're exercising, you expend energy, you need to have that alertness, and you have that performance. But at the same time, when you go back home, you have your dinner, you go to bed, you need to recover, and you let your body rest. During those times, our bodies, so how biology works is like it's always a wave. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. A lot of things in our body work that way, like especially with hormones and metabolites and metabolism in general. It'll go up, we'll use it, it goes back down, and then we send a signal, say, hey, we're low on energy, it goes back up, and so on. So because of these cycles, we need to be able to switch between signals. When we are low on energy, what needs to be switched on?
Hmm.
When we are high on energy, what needs to be switched on? So when we're low on energy, we need to be able to mobilize our storage system and really use them for the energy that we need. And then when we are in abundance of substrates or food, we need to be able to turn on our storage system so that we know where to store our excess calories. And then that's just internal. So externally, then, if we are doing extensive or intensive exercises, then we need to be able to pull fast energy sources like glucose, because glycolysis, the first step of glucose metabolism, it does not require oxygen. So it allows us to generate ATP, which is the energy source in a cell, without having oxygen. So when you do an intensive anaerobic exercise, you're essentially putting yourself in low oxygen environment because you can't breathe as fast, and therefore you're not taking in enough oxygen, but you still need to expend the energy. So glucose will always be preferred. But then when you're doing low intensity steady state exercises, where you are doing cardio zone 2, for example, you can go on for a long time because you have enough energy, you have enough oxygen, so that your body has enough time to pull from the bigger storage system, which is the fat storage. So switching over from sugar oxidation, from glucose metabolism to fat oxidation, when you're switching the types of exercise, that's metabolic flexibility. When you eat food and you are full and you're resting, you switch into storage system, versus when you are fasting and you go on a fasted cardio, that's when you switch from a storage to a expenditure system. That's also metabolic flexibility. So I
Hmm.
hope this long-winded way of explaining what metabolic flexibility is allows you to understand the importance of your body to adapt to the situation that you're in, and enable you to pick and choose what's most efficient for your body at this moment.
You were describing that on the thing that I kept imagining, to put it into layman's terms for people who may not understand it in that level of detail, is almost like seasonal eating, where you're basically giving your body the nutrients and food based on what's available at that time, based on the circumstances, the environment, the season, and everything. And I could be completely off tangent here with that train of thought, but it was more so just being hyper adaptable to the given circumstances or conditions that we're in.
It's another analogy that I just thought about. It could be like a factory making products, right? um you need every part of that factory to be efficient. You need the machineries to work well, you need the products, the raw materials to go in at the right time, and then the products to go out at the right time. If you have more products going in and less product going out, it's gonna jam the machine, it's gonna have some form of blockage. But if you have less products going in but then more coming out, then the machine is just running on energy without producing anything. So you need everything to be in sync and talk to each other, and our body systems are very good at communicating with each other, and each of our organs play very vital roles in each part of that function. So, for people who are going through chronic diseases, for example, some of the systems are dysfunctional, and therefore creating a miscommunication, and therefore creating a breakage within the metabolic flexibility.
Hmm. But you hear you hear the saying that our bodies are so smart and so robust and adaptable. But what is holding us back from being able to switch between these substrates? Is it lifestyle behaviors? I'm sure it probably leans heavier to the food and stuff that we're actually putting into our body. But can you touch on that?
So I'll go from the micro level to the macro level. So on
Okay.
the micro level, we're looking at biological level. It's essentially a dysfunction when it comes to signaling. So when I talk about, these organs are speaking to each other, For example, the liver say that you are running low on energy, so I'm going to break down fats to produce ketones when you're fasting or when you're low on carbs, or when you just ate, and your pancreas says, okay, I'm going to secrete insulin because I see a high level of glucose, so I need to pull in these glucose into storage so that your blood vessels and nerve cells are not exposed to high glucose levels at all times and create damage. So that is that sort of communication and signaling that I was talking about. When some of these are dysfunctional, when you have insulin resistant, for example, your muscles are not accepting or are not responding to the insulin being secreted by your pancreas, then it's not pulling in those sugar in your blood and your blood sugar stays high. That dysfunction creates damage, and over time it piles on. Now, what could cause all that dysfunction and miscommunication? That's when we talk about lifestyle, we talk about nutrition, we talk about inflammation, chronic inflammation, not acute. So something that I always try to reaffirm is that inflammation in and of itself is not a bad thing, because it is essentially our body's defense mechanism, or body's natural defense mechanism against any invasion or against any form of dysfunction that happens within the body, and we try to fix it. But the problem comes when we have a chronic, meaning long-term inflammation, where it's always elevated and not being shut down, because we are constantly creating that insult to our
Mm.
body and that damage to our bodies. So, to answer your question, we've got the micro level, and then the macro level that is causing it could be an excess of calories with the presence of seed oil, for example, sedentary lifestyle, and you are essentially having a whole package of abundance of calories that the body does not know what to do with, and it ends up shoving all into storage cells, and mainly adipose tissue, which is fat storage cells. And then it starts going beyond the capacity and leaking all the cytokines, or adipokines within those fat cells and creating inflammation. And then this inflammation also creates signals to the body to really cause havoc. And that's when the whole system breaks down, and you have manifestation of the symptoms of these chronic diseases. Most of the time, these dysfunction actually, you know they progress very slowly over years, if not decades, before you even see the manifestation of symptoms.
Hmm.
So it's very important for us to monitor, one, our biofeedback, but two, also our biomarkers, health being able to check our bloods at least once a year, if not 2 times, 3 times a year,
Yep.
especially if you're at high risk, to know the state of health that you are in. Granted, I know a lot of people would say that just a snapshot of your blood biomarkers may not tell you the full story, but it is at least providing us with some form of information to see where the direction of our health is going. And if we do see anything out of the ordinary, or we feel subjectively just bad, in general, like we feel fatigued, or we feel tired all the time, we feel bloated or whatnot, try and pinpoint what the root cause is, and always run elimination process is always an easy one when you use yourself as an experiment. Things that you do during the day that's causing you to feel that way, things that you eat during that day which is causing you to feel that way, and then try to eliminate them and see what is exactly the cause of it.
You touch on biomarkers. What are the key biomarkers someone needs to look at, to have that indication of potential poor flexibility?
I think a very important one that a lot of annual blood tests they don't cover is fasted insulin. That itself can tell us a lot, because the general blood markers that people take on their annual exams would be triglycerides, the cholesterol, so LDL, HDL, VLDLs. You get liver enzyme AST, ALT to look at liver function. You look at blood glucose levels, but not a lot actually measure faster insulin, because
Hmm.
I think that is super important. Because as I said, if you are insulin resistant and it is moving towards sort of type 2 diabetes direction, you may have a normal glucose level, but you may not necessarily have a normal insulin level. Maybe by then your body is already creating a high level of insulin to overcompensate the insulin resistance in your muscles, and therefore it is still able to keep your glucose level within the normal range. However, your insulin level is way beyond the normal range, so it is just a matter of time before your pancreatic beta cells shut down because it can't produce any more insulin, and then you get into a much more severe condition of type 2 diabetes.
Okay, so high level stuff, an overview. What are things we can do day to day that are going to
Day to
help
day,
alleviate some of these, symptoms or signs?
it's funny you ask that, because I think I recently, on my Instagram, I posted, things that food that are illegal in the US. Oh, sorry, illegal in the rest of the world, that is legal in the US, and why are they bad for health and whatnot. And some people were like, I know, can you post something? Can you make a content around stuff that we can eat instead, or stuff we should do instead? And I said, yeah, of course, but it may not be as entertaining as people think.
Yeah.
Things that we can do and we can eat is essentially, whole foods and things without like synthetic hormones, and things we can do is essentially the main foundation of your life, like things that you already are doing, your sleep, your exercise, what you eat. So you look at nutrition, you look at movement, you look at stress management, you look at sleep management. If all of those are already in shape, then you can look at supplementations. You can look at what can you do to further optimize your performance depending on your goal, right? If you want to lose weight, you want to look at different forms of exercise, different forms of calorie restriction, for example, or calorie deficit. And if you are looking to perform specifically in an endurance race, or a CrossFit games, then you will tailor whatever supplementation and tailor those behavior to match that goal. But most importantly, first and foremost, is always that foundation. Do you have enough sleep? Are you eating the right stuff in the right amount and in the right proportions of different macros, proteins, fats, carbohydrates? And then are you recovering well if you're working out hard?
Without looking at someone's blood panels, without talking about genetics, all of those factors, where's your stance on the ratio between proteins, fats, and carbohydrates? Just say for the average human being who wants to, number one, feel good, two, look good, and obviously they live an active, healthy lifestyle. Just everyday go getter. They don't have to be far end of the spectrum, elite athlete, or bottom of the totem pole. They're kind of
Yeah.
couch potato.
I can say so. I'm not a licensed nutritionist or dietitian,
Okay,
but
this is
I
off the
always,
record.
yeah, huh?
I said we'll keep this off the record.
Yeah. Well, I always believe, at least for myself, I will always prioritize proteins first. So
Okay.
if I want to maintain my muscle mass, I'll do 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight. And if I want to bulk up a little bit and gain more muscle weight, I'll do 1 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight of proteins. And then from there, I get the rest of the calories of the day get split between carbs and fats. Now, when it comes to carbs and fats, I know that keto diet have done wonders when it comes to insulin resistance and diabetes and reversing diabetes. But I also don't believe in long-term cutting out of a whole group of foods unnecessarily, unless you're doing it for therapeutic uses. If you're healthy, you are going about your day, you are within the normal weight range, I would say, keep it balanced and making sure that those are whole foods and not processed foods, as well as making sure that how those foods are being produced,
Hmm.
um, whether they're being used, whether they're using pesticides, or if they're using synthetic hormones for these animals and whatnot. So being cognizant of where your food sources come from, as long as you have the protein as the basis and then everything else on top of that, and then measure how much calories you need based on your body weight and
Yep.
your goals, that should be fine.
And what about when it comes to athletes? There's a lot of people in my circle, a lot of my followers who are professional athletes like myself, and particularly just say the power, athletes, the rugby, the football, those short bursts of high intensity, outputs of energy and power. Are ketones the optimal fuel source? Is there an argument for that? Is there an argument against that? And the reason I ask is I've heard both arguments.
Yeah. So I'll give you a very simple like evidence. Like there are studies that showed keto diet makes it detrimental for athletes. There are studies also showing exogenous ketones actually improve performance of athletes. They are both ketones, but why do they have contradictory results? One thing to always remember is that keto diet does not equals to exogenous ketones. Exogenous ketones is a form of external ketones that you can directly drink, like what we just did, on top of whatever diet you're on,
Hmm.
which means you can have access to all the ketones, but you also still have your glucose stores and your glycogen stores within your body. Keto diet, on the other hand, is completely or really restricting your carb intake, meaning that your body is always on a very low carb level or a very low sugar blood sugar level, as well as low glycogen stores. So when it comes to intensive exercise, as I said way earlier, we are still looking at the body's ability to utilize glucose in order to produce that fast energy. So no doubt that if you're on a keto diet, you can't pull enough sugar from your body to create that fast energy, and therefore it may be detrimental to the effect of creating the anaerobic exercise.
Wow. I keep
Yeah.
going.
No, however, when you are on exogenous ketones, you are giving your body an extra form of resource that is ketones on top of glucose. Because this is assuming that you're not on a keto diet, which means your blood sugar is high enough when you are, say, you have your food, a balanced meal before your exercise session, you will have a higher blood glucose level compared to a person who's on a keto diet. So
Yeah.
then your body is able to pull from the sugar pool and the glycogen stores, but at the same time, having the ketones giving you the mental clarity and mental focus that we have seen again and again in both studies and anecdotal
Yep.
situations.
Yep. I listened to a podcast a couple weeks ago. I forgot who it was, but they were mentioning if you think of your 7 day window in a week of your eating block, 2 or 3 days out of that week, you're actually consuming carbohydrates at a low to moderate level, but the other days, extremely low levels. And that was given whatever study that they were referring to, their patient's ability to become better, more metabolically flexible. Like, is that an actual thing? Do you
That
think that's true?
I think that's a very interesting area for sure. I think any form of switching between substrates is a good stressor for your body. When you when you introduce a stressor to your body will adapt to that stress. And the process of adapting to that stress will eventually make your body more flexible and stronger, given that you don't have any dysfunction to begin with.
Mm.
Now, if you have any dysfunction, you put more stress to your system, then it may cause more detrimental effects rather than giving you benefits. But if you're an athlete to begin with, you're very metabolically flexible, giving that stress and train your body to have high to moderate carbs, and you do intense exercise, you switch over to low carb and then put you on low intensity steady state and train your body to burn more fat when it needs to, could essentially train your body to be more metabolically flexible depending on the exercise that you're doing. So I think it really varies from person to person. And it varies between what goals that you're trying to achieve.
Is there a reason that I feel so much better when I consume the majority of my carbohydrates later in the day, evening, afternoon, and the majority of my fats earlier in the day? Is that because overnight, obviously, my glycogen levels are probably depleted? I was in that fasted state, and so now I'm giving them that source of fuel. Is there?
What you could do is measure your blood ketone levels in the morning. So finger prick, you can get it from Amazon. Just measure your ketone levels, and if it's more than 0.5, you are in ketosis, technically nutritional ketosis. And if you are consuming more fats during the day, you are still not kicked out of ketosis because you don't have the upregulation of insulin caused by glucose. So having that level of ketones will give you that mental clarity and that focus and that feel good feeling.
Yeah.
And then when you have your glucose and you're refueling your body, especially if you've already exercised, your body is just soaking up that glucose for recovery. And the upregulation of insulin also gives signal. It's an anabolic signal, so it gives signal for your body to really replenish and refill all your storage systems, like your glycogen, your fat
Yep.
storage, as well as helping with your protein synthesis, muscle recovery.
Who knows? I mean, that's just something I found, whether I
Yeah, it would
heard
be
that
interesting if you
on
just
a
measure your
podcast.
ketone levels. You might find out something about it.
Yeah. What I want to ask you about maybe the top 3 or 5, just say foods or ingredients that you think we must take out of our life, but also on the other side, because it's always easier to add things in rather than take things away, because we're so used to like our lifestyle or the way we're eating or whatnot. So for some people, it's just easier. Hey, add in X, Y, and Z, and that could have a huge impact on your life, on your health, on your well being. Yeah. What do you think those 3 to 5 things are on both ends of the spectrum?
You're right. Like, we are creatures of habits, and it is difficult to change behavior. Most of the time, we always switch back to what we're comfortable with, especially based on how we're being brought up and what we're comfortable with, and also in terms of
Yeah.
accessibility, what we can actually access, whether it's based on affordability, socioeconomic status, or where we live.
Yep.
And I think what should definitely be pulled out would be processed foods for sure. I think there is no reason to have calorie dense, hyper palatable, hyper processed food that is actually driving our hormones in a way that we don't want it to go, which is increasing hunger, increasing calorie intake when it's unnecessary and when we don't need that much calories to go through our day.
Yep.
And that's one for sure. And then two is, the more I look into it, the more I feel that in the US, especially, the food sources are very dubious. A lot of foods, when they were during the industrialization sort of period, during the war period, a few decades ago, foods were produced to be able to feed a lot of people and just produce a lot of calories so that people can get on with their days, right? But now we are in such an abundance uh, uh, age of abundance of food that we ought to look at not necessarily like calorie dense food, but the quality of the food that we're getting. Foods that are not forced to produce just calorie dense. Like, we're looking at use of synthetic hormones to make chickens grow faster
Yep.
at an unnatural rate that it's just messing up with our own hormones. We're looking at cows being used synthetic hormone to produce more milk that is again affecting our health, well-being. So being more aware, like myself included, I am way more aware where I'm getting my foods from, and then foods that we should really include. I mean, it's the opposite. It's essentially, the whole foods. But I certainly, like I said earlier, I do not believe in cutting out whole food group, cutting out all carbs, or cutting out all fats unnecessarily, unless you're doing it for therapeutic reasons. If you're doing it for epilepsy, for example, keto diet has been shown for more than 100 years to be super, super effective when it comes to treating epilepsy. And people who were on keto diet and going back to normal diet, they find remission, they find relapse of their epileptic episodes. And that's essentially not a choice for them to go back to a normal diet, and that's fine. But if you're healthy and you're trying to lose weight, you want to go on a keto diet to lose some weight, go on, lose the weight and do what you need to do to achieve your goals. And then after that, you don't like it's possible for you to switch back. And in fact, some studies show that switching back giving your body and your gut the stress that it needs to break the plateau that you've hit, and you may even get greater results because of that.
That's interesting. When I did about a year of pretty hardcore animal based diet,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't eat any vegetables for about a year. Mostly, red meat, eggs, dairy. The typical Paul Saladino diet. And I could
Right.
tell you though, now I eat more of I'd say a variety of foods. I'm not heavy vegetables, but I still adding those back in, and probably more carbohydrates now. But I think that period where I switched how I ate entirely was a catalyst for something new. Fitness scores changed. I hit top end speeds on the field that I never hit before. I felt better mentally, physically, emotionally. Everything changed. And now when I look at it, like you said, I do my absolute best to not consume seed and vegetable oils. Number one. Number two, added sugars. Number three, processed foods. And now I'm pretty cognizant of the fact that animal fats are good for you. Whereas before, I would stay so far away from the fattier cuts of meat or the butter. And if you looked at my blood levels, and I'm working with blokes, which have you met Josh Whalen yet?
No, I haven't.
He works with Sean as well. We got to get you guys connected, but we're doing all my blood, markers, and my testosterone then was horrible. Like a guy like me, looking like me, should never have the numbers I have, and now they went up by 400 or 500 points. And so that change in how I approach food was everything. Like it had such a profound effect on my life, where I think if more people were just more cognizant of what they're putting into their body, not the, hey, it's only 150 calories, low fat, gluten free, it should be extremely healthy. It's like, come on, like, you got to look at the ingredients. That could have more of an impact on you than just the calories that you're eating. So I'm happy you said that.
Yeah. And a lot of people, sometimes they're like, it's interesting because social media has such a reach nowadays. You get people on one end who's like, "Oh, stop fear mongering." I'm like, it's not fear mongering. You can get all these healthy food the same way. I'm not saying that we have no choice and it's the end of days and you have nothing but unhealthy food to eat. You can still choose the healthier lifestyle. And then you get the other end where people are like, "Oh, blah blah, this is nothing new." I'm like, yeah, it's nothing new, but we're still seeing rates of obesity, rates of diabetes skyrocketing year after year. So don't tell me there's nothing new. Tell the people who are still having that difficulty in their lifestyle. Like, let's figure out together as a community, as even as a nation, to figure out what is stopping people from making those choices. One thing for sure, I definitely realize my expenditure went way up after I choose these foods that are from like local farms and high quality meats and meats that are not laced with like preservatives that I have to consume within X amount of days because they are so fresh, and therefore I need to buy more and buy more often, and therefore my expenditure goes up. So that's definitely one of the barriers that we have to acknowledge, and
Yep.
we have to help people to be able to produce high quality food at a more affordable price, and also
Yep.
help people with lower income status to be able to buy these healthy foods. Because if you go to McDonald's, it's cheap food and it's calories and it stops people from starving. Like, you can't blame them. But what can we do? What parts do we play? Even if it's just a little, to make things better.
Yeah. No, well said. And my buddies who are from Ireland, who are on the U.S. team with me, they would tell me growing up, And even today, if mom and dad bought a loaf of bread and they left it out on the counter, it's going old in a day or 30 hours, not even 36 hours. They have, a gallon of milk. They have to drink that within 1, 2, maybe 3 days at the max. And if you think about the bread that we can buy here, the milk we can buy here, you can keep it in your cupboard or your fridge for weeks on end. And it's simple changes I think we can all just make, but it starts with having a little bit of an awareness of what's going on, why you got to make that switch. And they are subtle changes. Maybe a little more money, but is it money spent now or is it money spent later or time spent later, having to battle some of these things that, the rates are just going up and up. And so,
Yeah, they
yeah,
always say, do you want to pay the farmers now or do you want to pay the doctors later?
yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better. I want to dive a little bit into H.V.M.N, ketone IQ. I'm going to take my second shot. I know you've already had one today, so you don't need another one.
Yeah, I've got two
Maybe you
shots
do.
already in me. Let's not teach people to overdose on ketone IQ. Just because something is good doesn't mean that the more is the better. You need to keep the anything metabolic, anything physiology within the optimal zone. I always tell people that you need to keep it in the optimal zone to perform optimally. Just because you shoot it way up doesn't mean that it's always better.
Did you learn that from Oxford?
I learned that from very early on, even, it's something that I think everybody knows in biology.
Yeah.
Like, optimal sugar level, right? You don't, a lot of people, they're like, oh, very high is very bad, but very low is very bad as well. So you need that middle ground.
Yeah.
Same thing with ketones. Just because it's good doesn't mean that you need to like down a whole gallon of it.
I love it. People listening are probably thinking, well, I eat carbs. I'm not in ketosis, blah, blah, blah. But we know ketones cross the blood brain barrier. You even talked about exogenous ketones are different than the ketones that we're producing in our body. Why would somebody want to drink them?
Yeah.
And I want you to describe some of the how people are feeling, like they're recording these subject, I guess, changes in subjective changes in feeling and clarity and states, and then I want to give you my experience with how I'm using it as an athlete.
Sure. So, on a fundamental level, the molecule is exactly the same.
Okay.
If you drink a ketone versus the ketone that you make in your own body, your body will recognize it the same. But the physiological state in which you are in when you're drinking ketones versus when you're on a keto diet is very different. Because, like I said earlier, if you're on a keto diet, your body will have very, very, very low sugar levels. And then if you're drinking ketones, you are and you're not on a keto diet, you may very well have higher sugar levels as well as high ketone levels. And that usually is not feasible in a biological state because the increase in sugar increases insulin. Insulin signals the liver to stop producing ketones because it says you have energy in your body. Exogenous ketones basically allow you the flexibility of experiencing ketosis without having to go onto the keto diet. So even if you're not on a keto diet, that's exactly why you want to do exogenous ketones, because if you want to feel how it feels like to be in ketosis, having that mental clarity, and we talk about this a lot on mental clarity, a lot of people, they're like, what do you mean, like, is it like coffee? No, it's not like coffee because it's not a stimulant. Coffee does give you the awake feeling, but it gives you the increased heart rate and increased sort of adrenaline and stress feeling and anxiousness. But ketones, it's essentially a direct energy that you're providing to your brain, and therefore you will feel the awakeness without the jittery
Yep.
feeling, without the anxiety, and most importantly, it's a very subtle, calm focus. One thing I ask people to do is when they drink it, within 15 to 20 minutes, they should feel a subjective difference already. But most importantly, if they are focusing on how they feel, and do something that is cognitively demanding, whether you're studying, whether you're watching a lecture, whether you're doing a podcast, or even if you're just meditating, use your brain and then focus the state that you're in, and you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Because let's face it, as we talked earlier, exogenous ketone, ketone IQ, it does not taste great. We always joke about it. It tastes like how it works. It tastes like it works, because even though it doesn't taste great, we are selling out a lot. Like in Sprouts nationwide, you can get those shots right away. And people are slowly buying into it now because they can feel the difference.
Yep.
And they don't drink it for the taste, rather, they drink it for the productivity that they get for hours long after they take the first shot throughout the day. And
I
then they
take
take
it.
another shot before workout.
I take it 3 to 4 times a week before my workouts, or in the mornings where I'm having some sort of cognitive load. I take it before every single rugby match I play in. Take it right before I get out on the field for warm up, and I take one at halftime as well. I'm never going to change it. I feel it's gotten me into a easier state of flow than if I don't take it. Maybe my body believes in it. Maybe there's some placebo effect when I did it the first couple times because I was so locked in. But I'm doing it every game now, and I feel fantastic. And it's just this level of like, how do I describe it? Like, I become a little more tunnel vision with what I'm doing. It's easier to think about things, or it's easier to just stay in that routine. My mind's not wandering as much. I mean, I think I have ADD, so I'm all
Yeah,
over the
it's the
place.
focus. It's the focus. Same thing when I drink it before podcast.
Yeah.
Let's say if you have a question that you ask me and I've got a couple of points to answer that question. Let's say I have 5 points. It's really difficult for me to explain point one, point two, maybe up to point three, it's fine. But then point four and five will start to get blurry if I'm
Yeah.
not on ketones. And when I'm on ketones, I'm on point and I'm able to elaborate what I'm thinking, and at the same time simplify it to a point where people without a PhD could understand. I
Yeah.
think that has always been my biggest challenge, and ketones have been very helpful in that.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's you're able to tunnel vision. So when I use it for workout, I can just focus on the weights, I can focus on my form, and not actually let my mind wander and end up like losing some form, and hurt myself. Another point of taking it as well, a lot of people have been taking it for recovery. So they take it after working out, they take their proteins, their carbs, and then they'll take ketones. And they have been reported to improve their sleep, their recovery score,
Yep.
as well as there's a study that showed after 3 weeks, they improved their work output by 15%.
I think it was you on H.V.M.N, which for people that don't know, it's health via modern nutrition. Take it right before bed, and how it can have an impact on just say my Whoop or your Aura, whatever you're wearing, just your overall recovery and sleep. What is it doing to your body?
So that is still an area that we are very interested to look into. We did try to measure HRV when people take it before bed. We couldn't see any significant difference.
Hmm.
But anecdotally, we have athletes who take it before bed and they saw an improvement in their Whoop recovery score. So we don't exactly know what is going on there. But for sure, what we have seen in vitro studies, when you give proteins, carbs, and ketones after working out, you activate mTOR,
Okay.
which is essential for protein synthesis. So that could potentially be helpful when it comes to recovery of muscles, especially after a workout. And they have also shown an increase in glycogen resynthesis
Hmm.
when you take it after a workout with carbs.
Hmm. And you guys have this massive grant from the U.S. government, working with U.S. Special Forces. If you're allowed to say, what are you guys testing for, and what sort of preliminary, data are you guys finding?
So we are testing cognitive and physical performance in hypoxia.
Okay.
So low oxygen environment, especially in simulated altitude or high altitude, we are using exogenous ketones to improve performance. And we are wrapping up the project now, and we have seen very, very interesting results where they have seen increase in oxygen saturation
Hmm.
up to 7% when
Wow.
they're on ketones versus placebo. And that's super, super helpful when you think about it. And you have military personnel and high altitude, they need to be on high alert, they are at war. 7% in oxygen saturation means that you're getting that much more oxygen into the brain, and therefore you are not having that cognitive decline which you normally would if you're in a high altitude environment. So that is also reflecting on the increase in accuracy that we have seen on when people are on exogenous ketones as well. So I think when it comes to brain function, it is very much established um, with the use of exogenous ketones. So they looked at functional MRI. Another study that is not related to the military. They looked at functional MRI on aging adults and the interaction between brain regions. They term brain network stability. Both keto diet and exogenous ketones have shown to increase brain network stability, especially in these aging adults who are facing increased risk of decreasing or destabilization of brain network that will eventually lead to neurodegenerative diseases such as
Jeez.
dementia and Alzheimer's.
That's fantastic. Was there something I heard about slowing the rate at which our body uses glucose when taking exogenous ketones?
So they have a glycogen sparing effect when athletes are on exogenous ketones, and these are not keto diet athletes. They still have the glycogen stores. What we have seen is that the body will use up the ketones as well as some part of glucose as well. It's not just a switch on and off. They will use all of it at the same time, depending on different ratio, obviously. But the depletion of glycogen is a bit lower when they are on exogenous ketones
Mm.
compared to when they're not.
Cool,
So
cool.
in argument, so arguably, if you are running a long distance, endurance race, obviously have more of that glycogen stores. It will benefit you better because then you can pull from that glycogen store throughout your race later
Yep.
on if you have those distance to cover.
So it basically keeps your tank filled for a longer rate or time.
And at the same time providing you
Yep.
with the energy you need as well.
I want to tie this all back into your journey so far. And from all the podcasts you've been on, all the guests that you've had on HVMNs, and through all the interactions you've had with some of the leading experts in health, metabolism, performance, and just like happiness. I mean, I know you've talked with Max Lugavere and Sean Stevenson and all these, just incredible people. Like, what are some of the key lessons and learnings you found over the last couple of years?
With regards to
You can go on your own tangent.
anything, okay.
Anything.
um I think the funny journey that I've been on being a scientist, trying my darndest to be able to understand the most complicated metabolic and biological pathways, only to come back to this point where I need to simplify everything back to a level where everyone else can understand.
Mm.
That is the irony of this journey, is that it takes the brightest expert in a very narrow field to be able to explain a very complicated scientific concept into a simplified term so that people can take that insight and apply it in their own lives and improve their lives. And another thing that I've definitely learned by talking to all these, amazing people, Dave Asprey, Max Lugavere, Gabby Reese recently. My episode on the Gabby Reese show will come out on October 9th.
Amazing.
Sean Stevenson, Mindy Pelt. All these people have one thing in common, is that not only they are super knowledgeable, they are also very passionate about health, about helping people. And you can feel it and you can see it through, especially when you meet them in person. And they are very true to themselves. And definitely learned that you can't please everyone.
Hmm.
There will always people out there who would say you're a phony, you're fake, you are not real, you have no qualifications, you are lying, you are fear mongering. There will always be people out there who would say that. But as long as you're true to yourself, there will always be the bigger portion of people who share and resonate with you and benefit from you. And for me, my equation is simple. If I can influence one extra person to live healthily and not have to go through the chronic diseases that I've seen my family members go through, then I am happy with what I'm doing. That's all I'm going to remind myself every day in the morning, even when I read any messages, any comments that are not that positive, but I will still say thank you for your scrutiny, thank you for your comments, and I will tell them if their thought is valid or not, in my opinion, and I will say why, and hopefully they will be able to learn something from it, and I'll be able to learn something from it. And always remember, no matter what an expert say, they are still a human and they're still learning, and the moment they feel like they are on top of their field and stop learning, that's probably when you should stop listening to them, because science and knowledge is forever growing. And if they're not kept up to times, they're not kept up to the current data, we always find new data, contradictory data all the time. Just because you change your views does not mean that you don't have a spine. It's because you are adapting to the new data that comes in to make sure that people get the most accurate data so that they can practice what you preach at the utmost, accurate level.
Beautifully said, Lot. This was epic, and I learned so much. And I had so many questions, and you did an incredible job answering them all in such a way that myself, everyone listening, and all those people without PhD behind their name, can comprehend and understand. And hopefully, the conversation we had was in a way that people can start to implement some of these learnings and lessons into their own life. And they're not massive changes, and I don't think they should be, because those aren't sustainable. You mentioned we're creatures of habit. We absolutely are. If we can identify maybe one or two things in our life that aren't good for us, and we all know that there's probably a few of those in our life, and potentially add in maybe just one or two things, whether it's food or a lifestyle behavior into our life that are good for us, I think that could have a profound effect on so many people. And people, I think, are going to be more open to that idea than saying, hey, you have to go carnivore. Hey, you have to go vegan. These extreme positions. I don't think it's real, and it's not reality. But
Well said.
I just want to say thank you. This was awesome.
No.
I wanted to talk to you for so long. I've been using HVMN since February 18th of this year.
Wow.
Ketone IQ. That was the
A
first game of the
pleasure. The
season.
pleasure's mine. Thank you for reaching out. If you didn't, we wouldn't have had this conversation. Thank you for lending your
Yeah.
platform for me to share what I know and what I've learned.
Yeah.
And yeah, to your listeners, always remember, someone has a PhD that may give you some idea of their credibility and their qualifications, but at the end of the day, listen closely to what they say and what they're passionate about,
Hmm.
because as a human, that is way more powerful than any pieces of paper that anyone can prove to you.
Yeah, amazing. Lastly, where can people find you? Where can we get Ketone IQ? And how can we support you guys?
Sure. You can find me at Latt Mansor, LattMansor, on all social media. And I post reels all the time and our clips for H.V.M.N podcast, which I am the main host of at the moment. You can find H.V.M.N podcast on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. You can find more information about HVMN at HVMN on social media, as well as HVMN.com. And you will be able to buy Ketone IQ at Sprouts nationwide if you just want to go in and buy the shots. Or if you want to buy online, you can find us on Amazon.com as well as HVMN.com. So,
There you go.
and you can support us by supporting yourselves
Yeah.
being healthier,
Yeah.
and spread the message about just healthy living. Like you don't even have to mention my name or HVMN. If you just can spread the knowledge and information out there, um, they'll do good for everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.